There are places that don't vanish because a flood took them or because a war burned them down. They vanish because somebody decided they should. Somewhere in a climate-controlled archive, inside a drawer that isn't on the public inventory, there's a map that shows a city the government swears never existed. Not a legend, not a bedtime myth. A printed mark on paper with a name, grid coordinates, and a set of roads that lead into nothing. And tonight, I'm going to walk you through why that matters, what the evidence actually says, and how a city can be erased without leaving a crater. Who gets to decide what appears on a map? What does it mean when a whole city is missing from official records? And if it never existed, why would anyone ban the map? I first heard about the banned map, the way most real mysteries begin, quietly, with a detail that shouldn't have survived. A researcher friend, the kind who spends weekends reading microfilm like it's coffee, told me about a reference in an old catalogue entry. Restricted, requires director approval. No dramatic red stamp. No sirens. Just a line in a database from the late 1980s describing a regional planning sheet that had been pulled from circulation. The sheet number was ordinary. The restriction note was not. Records suggest the map belonged to a run of municipal surveys produced for infrastructure projects. Roads, power lines, water routing. The kind of maps bureaucracies love because they turn messy land into clean decisions. What makes this one strange is a thin cluster of blocks and street names printed in a place where later editions show only blank terrain. A city outline, a label, a central square marker. And then, in the next year's survey, it's gone, like someone took an eraser to the world. People think missing places are always about lost civilizations, ancient collapses, dramatic extinction events, but the evidence points somewhere colder. Modern, administrative, the kind of disappearance that doesn't need fire, just paper, policy, and patience. Imagine an archive at night, fluorescent light that never warms, the smell of cardboard and old glue, rows of drawers that slide out with a metallic sigh. You can hear your own breath because the room is designed to keep everything else still. In places like that, the past isn't romantic. It's filed. It's labeled. It's controlled. Archival notes indicate the restricted tag wasn't applied at creation. It was added later. That matters, because it suggests the map wasn't born forbidden. It became forbidden after someone noticed what it revealed. The first open loop I promised. How we can trace a city through the absence it leaves behind. The second, why the most likely reason for the ban isn't aliens, or ancient tech, or anything that sells a cheap thrill, but something far more believable, and far more unsettling if you care about truth. Let's set the scene. The city, at least on the map, sat near a border region that was, for decades, politically sensitive. Not necessarily a war zone, but a place where a new road could mean a new claim, where a census could become a weapon, where a minor, industrial facility could become a national secret. Historians debate the exact boundary conditions because different eras measured border differently, and bureaucracies love to redraw lines without admitting it. But the coordinates are consistent enough to narrow the search area to a corridor of rough land. Hills, scrub, seasonal rivers, sparse villages. So why would a map show an urban footprint there? One possibility, confirmed in other regions, is temporary cities. Not temporary like tents. Temporary like built fast, staffed fast, controlled fast. The kind of places that exist to serve a single purpose. Mining, weapons manufacturing, forced relocation, experimental agriculture, a military logistics hub. They're not meant to become home, they're meant to function. And here's where the evidence starts doing that thing evidence does. It whispers instead of shouting. There's no official city charter in the public register, no municipal founding date, no ribbon-cutting photographs. But when you widen the lens, you begin to see indirect traces. Old budget ledgers, a fuel distribution anomaly, a sudden spike in rail cargo to a maintenance depot that allegedly serviced nobody, a medical supply contract routed through an agency that doesn't handle hospitals, a school textbook revision that removes a regional example and replaces it with something bland. Could all of that be coincidence? Maybe, but coincidences don't cluster neatly around the exact coordinates where a city used to be printed. Now, a map is not reality. A map is a claim. It's a statement that says, this is here, and we can name it. When a map is banned, it's often because the claim itself becomes dangerous. Sometimes it's about privacy. Sometimes it's about national security. Sometimes it's about embarrassment. And sometimes it's about something worse, responsibility. I tracked down a retired cartography technician, anonymous for obvious reasons, who described how edits were handled in the late analog era. No Photoshop, no quick delete. Changes meant re-engraving plates, issuing revised sheets, and quietly pulling older versions from circulation. If you had the order, you could do it. If you didn't, you couldn't. The technician remembered one kind of order above all: withdraw and replace. That phrase, he said, was rare. It meant someone high enough had decided the public should stop asking questions. And here's the thing about withdraw and replace. You can't unprint what's already been distributed. You can only chase it. You can buy it back. You can pressure libraries. You can label it restricted. You can make it awkward to request. You can make researchers feel watched. You can't truly erase it. You can only turn it into contraband. That's how the banned map became a rumor, because somebody tried to bury it, and burial makes people dig. What people think is that the missing city must have been an outlaw settlement, a criminal haven, a place so dangerous it had to be erased. That's the movie version. The evidence points to something more mundane and more powerful: bureaucracy trying to protect itself from the consequences of its own decisions. Let's reconstruct carefully without turning this into fantasy. Step 1. The city appears on a planning map. That suggests official knowledge, not gossip, not folklore. Someone measured streets, assigned names, marked blocks. Step 2. The city disappears in later editions. That suggests a deliberate act, because cartography doesn't forget a whole urban grid by accident. Step 3. Public records don't match the map. That suggests either the map was wrong, or the records were altered, or the city existed in a category that didn't count as public. And that last part is where the room gets colder. There are documented historical precedents for non-public towns, closed cities, research settlements, labor camps, strategic industrial zones, places where residents have permits instead of citizenship rights, where mail is routed through coded post offices, where the town name is a number, and where the outside world is not invited to know. In some countries, these were called postal boxes. In others, they were special administrative units. Different labels, same idea: a city that works but doesn't speak. If the city on the banned map belonged to that category, then the ban makes sense without needing a conspiracy. The map would have exposed a location that the state preferred to keep ambiguous, and the easiest way to keep it ambiguous is to remove its name and wipe its outline from public editions. But then comes the twist, because at around 70%, the case file stops being about a city that was hidden and becomes about a city that was sacrificed. Here's what flips the assumption: satellite imagery, not the dramatic kind where you see buildings clearly. The credible kind: patterns, soil discoloration, linear scars where roads used to be, a geometry in the landscape that nature doesn't draw, right angles, parallel lines, an oval trace consistent with a small stadium or assembly yard. Archival imagery from the late 1970s into the early 1990s, where available, shows hints of development, then hints of demolition, then a slow return of scrub. So the city likely existed. The question becomes, why is it not there now? Disputed claims suggest a catastrophic event: an industrial accident, contamination, structural failure, a fire that spread through cheap housing. But there's no public incident report, no survivor interviews in the mainstream, no newspaper trail that matches. That silence is not proof of an event, but it is a condition that often accompanies the kind of event institutions don't want to own. Records suggest that in the same decade the map was restricted, there was a sudden reclassification of several regional files from civil to strategic. That's bureaucratic language for stop asking. Around the same time, procurement records, where they weren't fully redacted, show a spike in concrete, fencing, and heavy transport rentals in the corridor. not the supplies of a growing city, the supplies of a site being sealed and moved. If a closed city suffered an accident, the most likely response wouldn't be public evacuation buses with cameras. It would be quiet relocation, document reclassification, demolition to remove liability. And then, years later, a landscape that looks empty because empty is the story they can control. So what does the band map show, exactly? It shows a moment when the story wasn't controlled yet, a moment before the eraser. And now we return to the two open loops. First, tracing a city through its absence. How do you prove a place existed when the records are missing? You don't rely on one heroic document. You build a mosaic. You look for second-order evidence. Supply routes that make no sense otherwise, administrative line items without a recipient, utility projects with no civilian in point, small references in meeting minutes, and most importantly, the physical geometry of land that remembers what paper denies. Absence becomes a fingerprint. Second, why ban the map? The most likely explanation is not mystical. It's institutional. A map is evidence. If it shows a settlement that should not be acknowledged, then it threatens policy, border narratives, and accountability. If the settlement later becomes a problem, whether through accident, contamination, or ethically ugly purpose, then the map becomes a liability. Ban the map, and you reduce the number of people who can point and say, "It was here." Here's the verdict, delivered carefully. The city on the banned map most likely existed as a restricted administrative site, possibly tied to strategic industry or security infrastructure, and was later dismantled or decommissioned in a way that institutions preferred not to publicize. The banning of the map was less about hiding a magical secret and more about controlling a paper trail that could force uncomfortable questions. Who authorized it? Who lived there? And what happened when it ended? And that leaves us with three takeaways that aren't motivational posters, just hard, clean lessons. First, history isn't what happened. History is what survives. When you understand that, you stop treating textbooks like scripture and start treating them like curated exhibits. Second, the strongest secrets don't require darkness. They require filing cabinets, reclassification stamps, and enough time for the public to forget what it never knew. Third, the world doesn't just erase places. It erases responsibility. And whenever you see a blank space on an official map, you should wonder what the blank is protecting, your safety or someone else's story. So if you ever hold a map that feels too detailed for its own good, too specific, too confident, too quietly wrong, don't just ask what it shows. Ask what it used to show. Because somewhere out there, under scrub and silence, a city's outline may still be hiding in the dirt, waiting for the next file to be opened.